This class will be concerned with questionnaire design. Now it contains a lot of detail, a lot of information, so as you work your way through it, it may be best to stop the video from time to time and make notes of what's on the screen. Each slide may contain quite a lot of information, so it's worth using it as a source of notes and stop the video from time to time. So to start, I'm going to look across various points. I'll put the cursor onto the screen. I'm going to look across the primary concerns in questionnaire design: the wording, the instructions, the content, the response categories, and the order. And we'll go across each of these, and we'll have some general slides towards the end. But as you see, there will be quite a lot of detail. So first of all, to look at the primary concerns, we need to obviously consider what data collection method is going to be used. Will it be a questionnaire? Will it be an interview? Will it be perhaps some sort of focus group? Or what is it exactly? What's the method, and how will it be conducted? And what are the pros and cons of the method selected? Those should be researched, and you should be aware of the criticisms of the technique that's going to be used. Also consider the measurement scale and the statistical analysis that's going to be used. Each of these needs careful attention before an interview or a questionnaire or whatever it is conducted. So how will the information be analysed? How can it be processed in the end? Now moving to the wording. Well, it's important to use correct grammar and sentence structure. If for nothing else, just self-respect. But it certainly makes the interviewer sound far more professional if there's good grammar and good sentence structure. And above all, avoid slang and colloquialisms. Slang may not be understood widely, and even if it is understood, it creates the wrong impression. It's not the right place and the right time to use slang or colloquialisms. The wording should, however, be simple, and it should be possible to ask the questions in relatively easy style, so that the interviewee is not being intimidated by the questions. So it should be careful. You should be careful about the wording so that it comes across as an understandable question. And certainly the interviewee should not feel that they are somehow being looked down upon. It's presented in a condescending fashion, that the interviewer is far more superior. That's not the way it should come across. The tone of the conversation should be quite normal, and there should not be put emphasis on certain words in the questions, because that may mislead the interviewee. It may bias the response in a certain direction. So a fairly flat presentation of the questions is what's required. No particular emphasis on any one question, and try to avoid padding out the question or varying the question or adding supplementary information, because this may lead to bias and also lead to a set of results which are not conformable. They don't match each other because different interviewees were given different information. So the wording should be neutral and clearly communicated. That's the point. The instructions, well, instructions how to answer should be communicated to the respondent as a part of the question. Is it a yes/no question, or is it open-ended? So there should be a clear indication to the respondent, to the interviewee, as to what is required. And special instructions should be made clear at the outset. It's also possible, necessary, I should say, to clearly distinguish the instructions to the interviewer. And the interviewer could make use of, let's say, capitals or italics to place an emphasis if it was required within a question. So the interviewer knows where the question is focused. And that could be particularly important if the respondent asks for clarification. So if the respondent didn't understand the question, they may say, what's meant by? And the interviewer then has in capitals an explanation. So that would lead to greater consistency in the exercise. The content, as you can see, this slide is massive. As I said at the outset, it might be best to stop the video from time to time and make a note of these things, of the slides. But the content, well, it's necessary to be precise and specific, particularly with when we use words like organization. Does that mean a business? Does it mean the government? Does it mean a sports club? There's ambiguity about some terms, so it's necessary to be precise and specific and clearly indicate what the words mean. And it's also necessary to be specific and precise about time. For example, if you're asking an opinion about something that happened in the past, the further back it is, the more, in a sense, unreliable it becomes. But if we're asking about a particular time period in the past, is it a week? Is it a day? If you ask somebody about their past experiences, is that over their full lifetime? So it can lead to ambiguity. Try to avoid loaded questions, questions that will inevitably lead to a particular response. Inevitably leading to a particular response is not what is required, because the interviewer has determined what the outcome will be. That's not the purpose of the exercise. The purpose of the exercise is to gain information, to gain data that will be processed into information. Avoid double questions. Don't ask the same question twice. Perhaps even with different wording, still don't ask the same question twice. Because once the respondent feels that they are wasting their time, they will lose interest. And try to avoid all-inclusive terms like never and always. Because people's experiences may suggest that there are exceptions. I usually do this. Not I always do it. I usually do it. I don't do it if, and there are exceptions. So try to avoid generalities in that format. And don't use technical terms or abbreviations. These can be intimidating. People don't understand perhaps the technical terms or what the abbreviations mean. And you lose interest in participating in the interview, so they will walk off. And also avoid inflammatory words like racist or exploitation, or it doesn't matter who you're talking to or what their opinions are. Words like that will put people on their defense. If it is a controversial exercise, then very, very careful attention must be given to its structure, its wording, and its format, and it should really be checked out by many people before it hits the streets for interview. And make sure that all the questions are relevant. If you start asking irrelevant questions, again, the respondents will get fed up and leave. So all the questions should be relevant. And it goes without saying that all the important questions should be asked. And it's probably best to get those out of the way early in the interview, just to make sure that they are covered. The content, well, the questions should be brief, and they should have a specific function. Each question should be adding to the data which will be used to form the information from the exercise. So the questions should be specific. And write down the questions that are valid measures of the study's variables. Write down the questions that are most important and rank them according to their importance, so you make sure you get an answer to those questions. The important questions must be answered, and make sure that those questions are asked in a way that the respondent will give an answer, and that answer is amenable to some sort of analytical technique. It can be analysed. And if the question, of course, contains facts, make sure the facts are accurate. The last thing you want is the respondent to start correcting the questions. So if you say the Second World War, which started in 1942, led to whatever, that is not true. It started in 1939. And that just makes the whole exercise look pretty silly. Never assume as well that the respondent will have a certain behavior or a certain response. They may not. So it's a question of, again, being very flat, being very objective, and being very stand back when you ask the questions. Now, the response categories, well, they must match up to what is the information required. Why is the exercise taking place? Why is the interview why is it taking place? So the response categories must add to this. And the categories, they should really provide an exclusive background to the area being questioned. So the categories, when all the categories are put together, they should form the totality of the information that's required. So if the questions are asked about personal circumstances, attitudes towards government policy, attitudes towards the local community, or whatever, if these categories are then later on looked at and aggregated, put together, they should form the totality of the information that was required. There should not be a category in there that's just there for the fun of it, that's not doing anything. So some information may not be required. It's common among students, for example, when they're conducting quick interviews, to ask age. Age may not be relevant to the survey, but they somehow find it's necessary to ask it. Ask for an email address. Well, people may be reluctant to give an email address because they don't want spam emails. And is it necessary? Is that information absolutely required? The categories should also be mutually exclusive. In other words, there shouldn't be overlap between the categories. The categories should be separate, if there are categories. In small questionnaires, there may only be the one category. What is the respondent's opinion about whatever, this product? Is it too expensive? Is it nicely presented? Does it do the job? Is it good value for money? and there's no need to ask anything else. If you have questions that tend to be watertight, very, very exclusive questions, it's probably best to put in a don't know or a no answer refusal. Some people just simply don't know. I don't know what the answer is. Is it good value for money? I'm not sure really. Possibly. Not sure. That's a don't know. And that is more accurate than forcing the person to make a decision, which would be wrong. The order, well, treat all questions as part of a whole, not isolated or separate from each other. So all the questions are important, and all the questions it should read, and the respondent should feel that there is a continuous straight line all the way through. No overlap and no repetition. So each question is perceived by the respondent to be in a context of questions. So they should feel that each question is appropriate. It's natural for it to be there. Okay. Still with order. Questions should be grouped according to topic. If there are topics or subtopics that the questionnaire is perhaps trying to get at, or the questions are trying to get at, perhaps subgroups can be formed. Again, avoid overlap, avoid repetition as far as possible. Just lead the respondent into a set of questions about some aspect of, let's say, the product, if it's market research, and then return to pricing and how it's perceived in the market or whatever. Within a topic, it's usually best to arrange questions so they move from general to the specific. So by and large, do you buy soap powder? If yes, do you seek out powder which is of good value and whatever? And within that, there's a whole set of questions. So you have streamed the questionnaire according to the responses. These are led off according to the responses. If you attempt to conduct a questionnaire and ask the respondent, do you buy soap powder, and the respondent says no, then it is futile to carry on and say, well, in that case, what do you look for in a soap powder? Because they don't buy it. The questionnaire has finished. The exercise has ended. The interviewer should try and keep the respondent engaged. Keep the respondent moving along so that the questions are not that boring. It's not a big exercise of work. This is something that's quite pleasant. It's quite gentle, and it's not friendly, but it's not remote. It's just moving it along gently, so the respondent will participate. So questions should be using it should be seen as logical. It should be using a sort of logic and make sense to the respondent. Traditional statements could be used to maintain flow. So if a respondent says, yes, I feel that something, then you could follow up on that and say, oh, really? That would be in an open-formed response. So you could take some opinion about something on the side, make some notes on the side. The question should be fairly easy to answer, and they should definitely be related to the research topic. Otherwise, they're a waste of time. Sometimes, if it's a very formal exercise, it should be covered by an introductory letter. But even conducting an interview on the street, credentials should be shown, and the ethical implications of what you're doing should be made clear to the respondent, that the information is perhaps confidential and it does not attempt to pick up personal information or in any way make the respondent feel vulnerable if they participate. Sensitive questions are difficult to handle, and whether they're included or not should be really critically looked at. It may be that they have to be included, and if they are, then perhaps the gentlest form of getting that information in the most secure way should be made available to the respondent. Very, very easy questions, which may or may not be relevant, could be included at the very end. For example, where the interview took place, the time it took place, the environment in which the interview was conducted, any other issues that the respondent brought up which didn't fit into any of the particular categories, observations about the exercise. These could be included as some notes at the very end, just so that the context of the interview is understood when it goes for analysis. So it's important in the format to clearly distinguish questions from the response categories. The categories are just ways of grouping certain questions, and it's important that those categories don't overlap, or it'll cause confusion. So you just have a set of questions and some categories. The response patterns should be such as to they should be identified against the question. It should be married up to the question. In other words, if the question is practical or if it's vague, then the question itself should be clear that that question led to that response and that was anticipated, so that the interviewer has a way out of that situation. A lot of questions can lead to tiredness on the part of the respondent, and in that case vagueness can creep into the responses. Quite a dismissive response, because now they want to get on, they're finished. Perhaps the interview was too long. Don't break questions between pages. If you're using pages to ask the questions, don't have to fumble to turn over the page to find the rest of the question, because it's not professional and the interviewer is going to feel that they're just wasting time and you haven't adequately prepared. It's not properly prepared. Splitting a question or splitting complex issues into simple questions may be a good idea to avoid confusion and error. If the question is long and complex, respondents may not know how to handle that. They may get confused, or they may even become dismissive. Again, just give any answer to get it out of the way, to be polite. Not the answer that is the true answer, just a dismissive answer. So it may be the case when it's a complex question, break it into smaller questions which are clear, and then in the analysis later it can be reassembled to get a response to the more complex situation. As I said earlier, avoid duplicate questions because they're just going to alienate the respondent. And all the questions should be pre-coded so that it's easy to analyze later. A good idea is to pre-test the whole exercise to make sure that any issues have been identified in advance and there is a solution to the issues or the problems that were identified. So start by conducting a small-scale replica of the large-scale survey. So it's like a pilot survey. A pilot survey is meant to just clarify the issues, dry run it to see if there are any problems, and if it comes through the test, then it could be launched fully. In the pretest, step 1 would be administer the questionnaire to representative respondents. These could be anybody, could be even colleagues, providing they haven't worked on the design themselves, providing there is distance between them and the questionnaire. Their responses are quite valid. All you're trying to do is to find the criticisms of the questions, the sequence of the questions, if there's overlap, if there's duplication. These are the issues you're trying to identify. And if the respondent can see those, then it's possible to clean up the questionnaire and get it ready for the full-scale test. Administer revised questionnaire on a small scale. So when issues have been identified in lesson step 1, fix them. Make it in step 2 and do it again to make sure that the revised ones solve the problem. Next, enter the data into a spreadsheet or statistical package and tally the results to see if it's possible to do some sort of analysis on the results as picked up from the questionnaire. Step 4, construct a summary survey to see again if it's possible to do the analysis and do it efficiently. If it's a large survey, maybe involving several hundred, it can be very time consuming if there is no efficient method for doing the analysis. So it's important to have a format that can receive the information, summaries can be brought out, and somehow an overall view can be picked up efficiently from the exercise. And step 5, having gone through all of that, any issues that have come out, revise, go back to step 1 and do it again until finally the product is ready, the questionnaire is ready to go live. So the answers to the questions in the pretest suggest the variability in response. It's important in the pretest to make sure that the wording is precise. The wording leads to the outcome that is anticipated. If there's ambiguity in the wording, it's going to fail. And if questions like all or none are included, then all you need to do is find one exception which will rule out an answer. But is that really what is required? If 99.9% of the time people say yes, and just that 0.1% say no, that no is almost insignificant. Is it worth taking it into account? So having all or none as questions, as part of the wording of questions, may lead to issues. And include I don't know and refusals as responses. If those are if the questions are such that these are valid answers, then don't rule them out. Don't force an answer. Don't force people to select when they decide that is not true. What is true is they don't know. Avoid bad grammar, as I said at the outset, and incomprehensible slang. Uh, Nobody is going to treat the interviewer with any respect if they don't understand what the interviewer is talking about. The respondent may ask for a question to be clarified, and I think it's important for the interviewer to have perhaps even a version B of the question ready in case there's some ambiguity about the question or understanding the question as originally posed. But of course, having a B ready, having an answer B ready for that contingency means a lot more design work and a lot more issues in preparing the questionnaire in the first place. And frankly, very few people do. So the interviewer sometimes tries to clarify the issues. Now that may be bad because it may lead to bias. So again, in the pre-testing, it's important to have questions which are easily understood. Also, the interviewers want minimal administration. The interviewers want to be able to find the respondents, the interviewees, and pose the questions with minimal effort. So proper design as to the location and the administration of the exercise should be thought about in advance. And finally, the data should be entered onto a spreadsheet quite easily, perhaps nowadays scanned on or in some way electronically processed. So what items should be in a self-administered questionnaire? Well, prepare an introductory message at the top, a paragraph perhaps at the top, explaining what it's about. It should contain information about the topic and the purpose of the research, how it's going to be sampled, and protection of the respondent's confidentiality, the ethical issues, the name and address and phone number of a contact person. So everything is in the open so that confidence can be had from reading it and the respondents are more likely to respond. Keep the questionnaire procedures simple. Complexity is the last thing that's required in this situation. Complexity leads to non-response. And keep the questionnaire as short as possible so as to maintain interest. If you are asking questions that may be constructed as personal, then explain why they're necessary. Items for inclusion in with a self-administered questionnaire. Well, these are optional. The mandatory ones were just mentioned. Send the respondents an advance letter telling them the purpose of the survey. This should inform people that the survey is coming and explain why the respondents should answer the questions. And also tell them about who is being surveyed. Sometimes incentives are offered to get people to respond. With general marketing, it may be enter them into a prize draw or that sort of thing. Be prepared to follow up or send reminders, because a lot of times people will not respond because they've got too much spam mail or they've got too much coming through. And offer to send respondents a summary of the findings so they can see how the data is used. And if that's promised, then of course stick by it, do it. Items for inclusion in introductory message for a telephone interview. Well, it's important to say who is calling, give the interviewer's full name, identify the research organisation or the sponsor of the research, study the topic nature or purpose of the research. So what is the purpose of the research? Make it sure that the person at the end of the phone understands what it is. Tell them how they were selected. How was the sample formed? Tell them of the protection of confidentiality. And right at the outset, tell them how long the interview is likely to take place, or likely to take, I should say. Give the name and address and phone number of a contact person in case they wanted to phone back and check. And provide opportunity to refuse to participate as required by informed consent and volunteer participation guidelines. So having given them all of that, so them they don't have to participate, you would appreciate if they would. And give them a chance to ask questions about it in case they've got any worries or any doubts. The optional items that could be included in an introductory messages for a telephone interview, well, there may be an offer of incentives, entry into a free draw, or tell them how the information will be used to improve a product or improve a service in the future, if that's the case. Tell them the format of the interview. Will it be open or closed, and will they be under stress answering the questions, or is it quite easy and quite straightforward? And tell them about the sponsor. Why is it taking place? Why is this interview taking place? And any unusual expectations of the respondent. So it may be that the questionnaire is about some aspect of the respondent's earlier experiences in life, or the respondent's understanding of current issues, or but nothing intimidating, nothing to scare off or worry the respondent. And finally, give them a chance to discuss the whole exercise. Why is it taking place? Why should they participate? Allay any worries they've got about confidentiality or ethical issues, and based on that, hopefully they would respond. As you can see, this class has been a lot of information, quite technical, quite complex. Strongly advise you to go back to the start and take notes off the slides and work through the slides to build up your own set of notes and your own pictures of what's required in conducting interviews. This is a very detailed class, and it's important that you make your own notes off the slides. My comments throughout hopefully will be of use in clarifying some of the issues, but essentially most of the information is included on the slides. So that concludes this class, and thank you for watching.